The girl found a bull covered in bees. What happened next shocked everyone. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment below, telling us where you're listening to this story from. The sun was setting over the rolling hills of rural Queensland when 12-year-old Emma Mitchell heard it. A sound that didn't belong in the peaceful evening. A low, desperate bellow that made her blood run cold. She'd grown up on her family's cattle station, knew every sound the animals made, but this was different. This was agony. Emma dropped the bucket of feed she'd been carrying and ran towards the sound, her boots kicking up red dust as she sprinted across the paddock. Her father was in town getting supplies, her mum was at the main house preparing dinner, and her older brother Jack was fixing fences on the far side of the property. She was alone. The bellowing grew louder as she crested the small hill near the old dam, and then she saw it. Her heart stopped. Brutus, their prized Brahman bull, nearly a ton of muscle and bone, worth more than her dad's ute, was on his knees in the tall grass. But it wasn't an injury or illness that had brought the massive animal down. It was bees, thousands upon thousands of bees, covering his head, neck and shoulders like a living, writhing blanket. The air around him vibrated with their angry buzzing, a sound so intense it made Emma's teeth ache. The bull's eyes were swollen, nearly shut, his massive head swaying as he tried desperately to shake off the attackers. But every movement seemed to enrage them further. More bees swarmed from a fallen log nearby, a wild hive that Brutus must have disturbed while grazing. Emma's first instinct was to run back to the house, to get help, to let the adults handle this. But even from where she stood, she could see Brutus was in serious trouble. His breathing was labored, coming in great heaving gasps. The bees were stinging him relentlessly, and with each passing second, more venom pumped into his system. Bulls could die from bee attacks. She'd heard the stories from other stations. Her mind raced. The house was at least 10 minutes away, at a sprint. By the time she got back with help, it might be too late. But what could a 12-year-old girl possibly do against thousands of angry bees and a panicking bull that outweighed her by hundreds of kilos? She looked around desperately. The old dam was about 30 meters away, its murky water reflecting the orange sky. Water. Bees couldn't follow through water. But how could she get Brutus to move? In his current state, confused and in pain, he was as likely to charge her as follow her. Then she remembered something her grandfather had taught her before he passed away. He'd been a drover, spent his life working with cattle across the outback. "A bull's a smart, Em," he used to say. "Smarter than most people give them credit for. They remember kindness. They know who's trying to help." Emma had raised Brutus from a calf. When he was just days old, he'd been rejected by his mother, and Emma had bottle-fed him every 4 hours for months. She'd slept in the barn with him when he was sick, talked to him for hours while doing her homework nearby. Even now, at 2 years old and massive, Brutus would still come to the fence when she called, would let her scratch behind his ears in a way he wouldn't tolerate from anyone else. Taking a deep breath that did nothing to calm her racing heart, Emma made her decision. She pulled off her jacket, despite the dozens of bees that immediately showed interest in her, and started walking slowly towards the suffering bull. "Brutus," she called softly, her voice shaking. "It's me, mate, it's Emma." The bull's head turned slightly at the sound of her voice. Even through the swarm and his swollen eyes, some part of him recognized her. "I know it hurts," she continued, moving closer despite every instinct screaming at her to run. "I know you're scared, but I need you to trust me, just like when you were little." She was 5 meters away now. Bees buzzed past her face, landed on her arms. One stung her neck, and she gasped at the sharp pain, but didn't stop moving forward. Her eyes watered, but she kept them fixed on Brutus. "Remember when you were sick and I stayed with you all night? Remember how I'd sing to you?" And then, ridiculously, with tears streaming down her face and her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst, Emma started to sing. It was Waltzing Matilda, The same song she used to sing to him as a calf, her voice cracking and thin in the open air. Brutus went still. The massive bull stopped thrashing, his head lowered towards her voice. More bees swarmed over him, over her. But for a moment there was just a girl and the bull she'd raised. "That's it, mate," Emma whispered, now close enough to touch him. "Now we're going to walk to the dam. Yeah, nice and slow. The water will help, I promise." She reached out and gently touched his nose, the one spot relatively clear of bees. His skin was hot, feverish. He made a low sound, not quite a bellow, more like a whimper. It broke her heart. "Come on, brave boy. Follow me." Emma turned and started walking backwards towards the dam, her hand still extended towards Brutus. For a terrifying moment, he didn't move. The bees continued their assault, their buzzing seeming to grow even louder. Then, slowly, painfully, the massive bull struggled to his feet. Each step was agony for him. She could see it. His legs trembled. His breathing was ragged, but he followed her. One step, then another. Emma kept singing, kept talking, keeping her voice as calm as she could manage, even though she was being stung repeatedly now, even though every nerve in her body screamed at her to run. "Just a bit further, mate. You're doing so well." Almost there. They were 10 meters from the dam when Brutus stumbled. His front legs buckled and he went down hard, a cloud of dust rising around him. The impact seemed to drive even more bees into a frenzy. Emma could see his flanks heaving, could hear the wheezing rasp of his breathing. He wasn't going to make it to the water on his own. Emma didn't hesitate. She ran to the dam's edge, kicked off her boots, and waded in until the water reached her waist. The cool liquid was a relief against her stung skin, but there was no time to appreciate it. She grabbed an old plastic feed bucket that had been left by the water's edge months ago, filled it, and ran back to Brutus. The bees immediately swarmed her, but Emma had gone beyond fear now. Operating on pure adrenaline and determination, she dumped the water over Brutus's head. Hundreds of bees were washed away, but hundreds more remained. She ran back to the dam, filled the bucket again, dumped it, again and again. On her 5th trip, she heard the distant sound of a vehicle. Help was coming, but she couldn't stop. Each bucket of water brought temporary relief to the bull, washed away more bees. Her arms screamed with effort, her lungs burned, and her entire body felt like it was on fire from the stings, but she kept going. Skidded to a stop, and her brother Jack jumped out, taking in the scene with wide eyes. He grabbed a second bucket and joined her without a word. Together, they formed a chain, dumping water over Brutus until finally, mercifully, most of the bees dispersed, driven away by the water and the approaching dusk. When the immediate danger had passed, Emma collapsed next to Brutus, her hand on his heaving side. She'd been stung at least 40 times. Her face was swelling, her arms were covered in red welts. But she was alive, and so was Brutus. "You absolute mad woman," Jack said, his voice a mixture of awe and terror. "Do you know how close you came to being killed, either by the bees or by him?" Emma couldn't answer. She was shaking uncontrollably now, the adrenaline wearing off and shock setting in. Jack wrapped his jacket around her shoulders and called their parents on his mobile, explaining the situation in short, urgent sentences. The next hours were a blur. Their father arrived with the local vet, Dr. Sarah Chen, who'd been having dinner at the pub when she got the emergency call. While Dr. Chen treated Brutus, administering antihistamines, corticosteroids and fluids through an IV, the local GP, Dr. Morrison, treated Emma. 43 stings, Dr. Morrison said, shaking his head as he applied cream to each welt. "You're lucky you're not allergic. This could have been fatal." Emma's mother, Christine, sat beside her daughter with tears streaming down her face, holding her hand so tightly it hurt. "What were you thinking?" she whispered. "You could have died." "He would have died," Emma replied simply, her voice hoarse. "I couldn't let that happen." Dr. Chen came over once she'd stabilized Brutus, her expression grave. He's not out of the woods yet. The venom load is massive. The next 24 hours will be critical. But without what you did, the water, keeping him calm, he wouldn't have lasted until I got here. You saved his life, Emma, though I'd never recommend anyone try what you just did. That night, Emma refused to go to the house. Despite her parents' protests, she insisted on staying in the barn with Brutus. Her father finally relented, bringing out blankets and pillows, setting up a camp bed near the bull's pen. Jack stayed too, partly to keep an eye on his sister, partly because he couldn't quite believe what he'd witnessed. "How you know?" he said quietly in the darkness. "When we were kids and you used to talk to him for hours, I thought you were being silly. I get it now. He knew you. He trusted you enough to follow you when he was in agony and terrified." "That's not normal, Em. That's something special." Emma didn't respond. She was too focused on Brutus's breathing, counting each breath, willing him to keep fighting. Around midnight, Brutus's condition worsened. His breathing became more labored, his temperature spiked. Dr. Chen, who'd left her emergency contact number, came back immediately. For 2 hours, she worked to stabilize him while Emma watched, feeling helpless. All the courage she'd shown earlier meant nothing if Brutus died anyway. "Talk to him," Dr. Chen said suddenly. "Your voice seems to calm him. His heart rate drops when you speak." So Emma talked. She told him about her day at school, about the book she was reading, about plans for the Christmas holidays. She sang Waltzing Matilda again, her voice cracking on the familiar words. And slowly, impossibly, Brutus's vital signs stabilized. By dawn, the crisis had passed. Brutus was going to survive. The story spread quickly through their small community. By the next afternoon, reporters from the local paper had shown up, wanting to interview the brave girl who saved her bull from killer bees. Emma's father tried to send them away, but Emma agreed to talk on one condition, that they mention how important it was to check properties for wild beehives, especially during the warmer months. The article ran with a photo of Emma standing next to Brutus's pen, her face still swollen from stings, her arm around the bull's massive neck. The headline read, "12-year-old's courage saves prize bull." But something unexpected happened after the article was published. Emma started receiving letters. First just a few, then dozens, then hundreds. They came from all over Australia, then from around the world, farmers writing to share their own stories of dangerous animal rescues, children saying Emma had inspired them to be braver, animal welfare organizations requesting interviews. But the letter that meant the most to Emma came from an old woman in Western Queensland named Margaret Sullivan. She wrote that she'd been a drover's daughter, just like Emma's grandfather had been a drover. She recognized the courage Emma had shown, but more importantly, she recognized the bond between girl and animal. "And your grandfather would be proud," the letter read. "What you did wasn't just brave. It was what we old bushies call having heart. You saw a creature suffering, and you didn't calculate the risk or wait for someone else to act. You just did what needed doing. That's becoming rarer these days. Don't lose it." Emma kept that letter in her bedside drawer and read it whenever she doubted herself. 2 weeks after the incident, Brutus had recovered enough to return to the main paddock. The swelling had gone down, his breathing was normal, and he was eating well, but he'd changed. Or perhaps Emma had simply never noticed before how closely he watched her, how he would position himself near whichever fence she was working by, how his ears would swivel towards her voice even when she was talking to someone else. Her father noticed it too. "That bull follows you around like a puppy," he said one evening, watching as Brutus walked along the fence line to stay near Emma as she moved hay bales. "I've worked with cattle my whole life, and I've never seen anything quite like it." "Grandpa always said animals remember kindness," Emma replied. "Maybe Brutus remembers that I helped him." "Maybe," Or maybe, her father paused, choosing his words carefully, maybe there's more to the bond between animals and humans than we usually acknowledge. Your grandfather believed that. He used to say that cattle could sense a person's character, could tell who genuinely cared for them and who just saw them as property. The attention from the media eventually faded, as it always does, but the impact of that day rippled outward in ways Emma hadn't expected. The local agricultural college invited her to speak to their animal husbandry students. A wildlife rescue organization asked if she'd volunteer during school holidays. The state's Beekeeping Association sent information about how to safely manage bee encounters and how to identify wild hives. But the most significant change was in Emma herself. Before that day, she'd been considering following her brother to university in Brisbane, maybe studying law or business like her mother had. The station was Jack's future. He was the eldest, he wanted it, and that was that. But now, standing in the paddock watching Brutus graze peacefully in the afternoon sun, Emma realized she didn't want to leave. Not the property, not the animals, not this life. She started researching veterinary schools, agricultural science programs, anything that would let her work with animals. She devoured books on animal behavior, spent hours online learning about cattle health and welfare. Dr. Chen noticed her interest and began unofficially mentoring her, letting Emma shadow her on farm calls during weekends. 3 months after the bee attack, Dr. Chen called Emma's father with a proposal. "There's a young Brahman bull at a property near Townsville," she explained. "He was attacked by wild dogs as a calf, survived, but with significant trauma. The owner can't get near him, can't treat his ongoing health issues because he's too aggressive and fearful. They're planning to put him down. But I thought maybe Emma might be able to help." Emma's parents were immediately against it. Their daughter had already risked her life once, but Emma, with a stubbornness they were beginning to recognize, insisted, "If I can help, I should try." That's what Grandpa would have said. After much debate and with strict safety conditions, they agreed. Emma, her father, Jack, and Dr. Chen made the 7-hour drive to Townsville. The bull, named Titan, was in a reinforced pen, pacing and snorting, his eyes wild. The owner, a weathered man named Bill, looked exhausted. "He's going to hurt someone eventually," Bill said sadly. "I've tried everything. Can't even get close enough to check his wounds properly. They're infected, been getting worse. Tomorrow the knackery truck is coming." Emma studied Titan from a safe distance. She could see the scarring on his flanks, the way he favored his left rear leg. But more than that, she could see his fear. He wasn't aggressive by nature. He was terrified, lashing out because he expected pain. "Can I have until sunset?" Emma asked. "Just to try." Bill shrugged. "What's a few more hours?" Emma didn't approach Titan directly. Instead, she sat on the fence rail about 10 meters from his pen, simply watching. She didn't stare at him. Her grandfather had taught her that direct eye contact was threatening to cattle. She just sat, occasionally glancing his way, occasionally looking at the sky or the trees, being present without being demanding. An hour passed. Titan continued pacing, but gradually his movements became less frantic. Another hour. He stopped pacing and stood at the far side of the pen, watching her warily. Emma began to hum softly, then to sing, not Waltzing Matilda this time, but Click Go the Shears, another bush song her grandfather had loved. As the sun began to lower, Emma slowly slid off the fence rail and moved closer to the pen, still not looking directly at Titan. She could feel everyone's tension. Her father had his hand on the fence rail, ready to vault over and pull her back if needed. "You're scared, aren't you, mate?" Emma said softly. "Something bad happened, and now you think everyone wants to hurt you. I get it. I was scared too, when Brutus was covered in bees. Thought I might die. But sometimes you have to trust, even when you're afraid." She was at the pen fence now. Titan snorted, tossed his head, but didn't charge. Emma extended her hand through the rails, palm down, non-threatening. "I'm not going to hurt you, I promise. We just want to help those wounds heal. For 5 minutes, nothing happened." Then gradually, Titan took a step towards her, then another, his nostrils flared, taking in her scent. Another step. He was close enough now that Emma could touch him if she reached further through the rails, but she didn't. She let him come to her. When his nose finally touched her palm, Bill actually gasped. "I'll be damned," he whispered. It wasn't a miracle cure. Titan didn't suddenly become docile, but something had shifted. Over the next 3 hours, with Emma talking constantly in that same calm voice, Dr. Chen was able to enter the pen, examine the wounds, and administer antibiotics and pain medication. Titan tensed several times, once even bellowing and backing away, but each time Emma's voice brought him back. "He's savable," Dr. Chen announced. "The infections are bad, but treatable. With proper care, he'll recover fully." Bill was nearly in tears. They'd come to put Titan down, and instead there was hope. He offered to pay Emma, to pay for petrol, anything. Emma's father declined politely, but Emma spoke up. "Actually, there is something. If you hear about any other animals that people have given up on, animals that are going to be put down because they're too difficult, could you call us, or Dr. Chen?" Bill promised he would. On the drive home, Emma's father was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "Your brother wants the station, always has. But you, you've got something different. A gift, maybe. Your grandfather had it too." 5 years passed. Emma finished high school with top marks and received offers from 3 veterinary schools. She chose the University of Queensland in Brisbane, the same city her brother had initially gone to, though Jack had since returned to run the family station full-time with their father. But Emma came home every holidays, every long weekend, whenever she could. And each time, Brutus would be waiting at the fence nearest to the house, as if he somehow knew when she was due to arrive. He was fully grown now, a magnificent bull who'd sired several prize-winning calves. But he still let Emma scratch behind his ears, still followed her around the paddock like he had as a calf. During her 3rd year of veterinary school, Emma received an unexpected email. It was from a documentary producer in Sydney named Rachel Torres. She'd heard about Emma's story, the original one with Brutus, and the subsequent cases she'd worked on with Dr. Chen, and wanted to make a short documentary about the bond between humans and farm animals. Emma was hesitant. She'd never sought attention for what she did. But Rachel's email emphasized something that resonated. So many people see farm animals as just livestock, as products. But your story shows something different, that these animals are individuals, capable of memory, trust, and connection. That's a message worth sharing. After discussing it with her family, Emma agreed. Rachel and a small crew came to the station during the summer holidays. They filmed Emma with Brutus, interviewed her family, spoke with Dr. Chen, and even traveled to Townsville to film Titan, who was now a healthy, well-adjusted bull. But the most powerful footage came unexpectedly. While filming one afternoon, Brutus suddenly became agitated, bellowing and pawing at the ground near the old dam, the same area where he'd been attacked by bees all those years ago. Emma went to investigate and found a small calf, not from their herd, stuck in the mud at the dam's edge, exhausted and close to giving up. The cameras captured everything. Emma wading into the mud, speaking softly to the frightened calf, Brutus standing nearby as if standing guard. It took nearly an hour, but Emma managed to free the calf and reunite it with its frantic mother from a neighboring property. Afterwards, Brutus had walked over to Emma and gently pressed his massive head against her shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that made Rachel cry behind the camera. The documentary, titled The Language of Trust, premiered at a small film festival in Melbourne and won the Audience Choice Award. It was picked up by a streaming service, and suddenly Emma's story reached millions of people around the world. The response was overwhelming. Veterinary schools started incorporating the documentary into their animal welfare courses. Farming associations invited Emma to speak about humane animal handling. She received thousands of messages from people sharing their own stories of connections with animals or asking for advice about traumatized livestock. But the most meaningful impact was closer to home. Neighboring stations started calling, not to praise Emma, but to ask for help with their own problem animals. A horse that wouldn't load into a trailer after a previous accident, a sheepdog that had become aggressive after being attacked, a dairy cow that wouldn't let anyone milk her after a traumatic birth. Emma, still a student, would come home on weekends and work with these animals, usually successfully. She never charged for her time, though farmers often insisted on paying her father for consultation fees, which he quietly put into a university fund for her. One evening, during her final year of veterinary school, Emma sat with her grandfather's old friend, Margaret Sullivan, who, despite being in her 80s, still lived independently on her small property. They were watching the sunset, drinking tea, with Brutus visible in the nearby paddock. "Your grandfather would be proud, you know," Margaret said, "not just of what you did that day with the bees, but everything since. You've taken his lessons and made them your own." "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing enough," Emma admitted. "I'll be a vet soon, but there are thousands of animals I can't help, can't reach." "Love, you're not meant to save them all. No one can, but every animal you help, every person you teach to see their livestock differently, that ripples out. That changes things. Your grandfather used to say that the mark of a good drover wasn't how many cattle they could move, but how calmly they could move them. No stress, no fear, just steady trust. That's what you do, Em. You build trust where others see only problems to be solved or products to be managed." A month before graduation, Emma received news that made her heart sink. Bill, the farmer from Townsville who'd owned Titan, had passed away. His property was being sold, and Titan's fate was uncertain. The new owners weren't interested in keeping a bull with a difficult history. Emma called the new owners immediately, offering to take Titan. They agreed, relieved to not deal with him. Jack drove up to Townsville with a cattle trailer. When they arrived, Titan was in the same reinforced pen, agitated and fearful with all the changes happening around him. Emma approached exactly as she had 5 years earlier, sat nearby, not forcing, just being present. Within an hour, Titan had calmed. Within 2 hours, he walked into the trailer voluntarily. Jack watched in amazement. "How do you do it?" he asked on the drive home. "I've worked with cattle my whole life, and I've never seen anything like what you do." "I don't do anything special," Emma replied. "I just listen. Really listen. Not to what they're saying with sounds, but with their body language, their fear, their trust. Grandpa taught me that. Animals will tell you everything you need to know if you pay attention." Titan settled into the station beautifully. And something unexpected happened. He and Brutus formed a bond. 2 bulls who'd both suffered trauma, who'd both been saved by the same girl, who now grazed peacefully side by side. Emma graduated top of her class and immediately joined Dr. Chen's practice as a junior vet, but she specialized in behavioral issues and trauma cases. The animals other vets said were too difficult, too dangerous, too damaged to be worth the effort. On her first day as a qualified veterinarian, Emma's parents gave her a gift. It was her grandfather's old stockwhip, preserved carefully all these years. Attached was a note in his handwriting, dated the week before he died. "For Emma, who has the heart of a drover and the soul of a healer. Make me proud, little one." She carried that whip in her ute not to use. She rarely needed physical tools with animals, but as a reminder of where she came from and what she stood for. 10 years after the bee attack that started everything, a journalist asked Emma what she'd learned from that day. She thought for a moment, then said, "I learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. I was terrified that day, but I learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is show up, even when you're scared. Whether it's for an animal or a person or yourself, just show up and do what needs doing." The journalist asked if she'd do it again, knowing the risks. Emma looked out the window at Brutus and Titan, both now older, both content, both alive because someone had refused to give up on them. "Every single time," she said. "Every single time." Years later, Emma would open her own practice, specializing in farm animal welfare and behavioral rehabilitation. She'd train other vets in her methods, write papers on animal trust and trauma, and quietly revolutionize how many farmers in her region treated their livestock. She'd save hundreds of animals that others had written off as lost causes. But she'd always say that everything she knew, everything she'd accomplished, started with a scared girl, a bull covered in bees, and the choice to act when every instinct said to run. That moment taught her that the bond between humans and animals could be powerful enough to overcome fear, pain, and seemingly impossible odds. And Brutus, the bull who'd started it all, lived to the remarkable age of 18, ancient for a bull, passing away peacefully in his sleep in the paddock he'd called home. Emma was with him at the end, her hand on his neck, singing Waltzing Matilda one last time. What happened that day with the bees shocked everyone who heard about it, but the real shock wasn't just the courage of a 12-year-old girl. It was the reminder that animals, even large, powerful, supposedly simple creatures like bulls, are capable of trust, memory, and connection in ways we're only beginning to understand. And sometimes, when we're brave enough to truly see them, they show us something profound about compassion, loyalty, and the unbreakable bonds that can form between species. Emma never forgot that lesson, and neither did anyone who heard her story.